Welcome, everyone. We're not going to waste any of your time today. I am Ann Russo with Building Officials Association of Florida. I know I've met many of you. I've talked to most of you on the phone, so thank you for joining us today. On the call with us is Mike Savage. He's the building official for Marion County. He's going to be our presenter today while we start to talk about parliamentary procedure and running a meeting. And I just also want to mention Terry Sullivan, the city of South Pasadena, and Arlene Stewart with AZS Consulting. She's one of our commercial members. The three of them worked together to put this presentation together for you. And I just want to tell them thank you for that. And so at the end of Mike's presentation on parliamentary procedure, we're just going to open it up for a little Q&A. And what I'm hoping that we get from this is that the start of a discussion among the chapter leaders, the chapter officers, emerging leaders, that we can just start a discussion on how we can all just be a resource to each other. And at the end of the when we close the Zoom meeting out in the browser, a survey will pop up where you can tell us how you liked or didn't like today's meeting and what you'd like to see in the future, because we're listening to you. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Mike Savage, and this meeting, the setup in Zoom is a little bit different than what I'm used to. So please forgive us if anything wonky happens, but I'm going to make Mike the host now.
Good afternoon, everybody. This presentation is really going to be a parliamentary procedure 101 because we had some chapters that really didn't understand exactly how to run a meeting. So we thought we would put something together just to kind of go over 101 type of parliamentary procedures, and actually went a little deeper than probably a 101, but we didn't dive too deep, just to make sure everybody was grasping it. So I'm going to turn off my video really quick. I'm going to hit share my screen, and we're going to hit begin presentation, and you guys should be seeing the full presentation at this point.
We are, Mike.
Oh, perfect.
Looks good.
So just to start off, this is one of the, I think the first presentation, as we were talking offline, the first presentation really from the Member Services Committee. And we really wanted to make sure that we hit something that specifically the membership was reaching out for. And I know there was a survey that went out a while back, and parliamentary procedures was one of the things that the membership wanted. So let's get started on it. What do we expect to learn? Well, obviously parliamentary procedure. Why is it important, and how those procedures actually work inside of a meeting? Your local chapter meeting, some of the stuff you'll actually have seen being used in BOAF board meetings. So it's being able to be used across the board. So what is parliamentary procedure? It's a set of rules, set of ethics that facilitate letting a group work together, either in a chapter, a board meeting. You may have, in my case specifically, I have a development review committee, and we use the parliamentary procedure process. And it just helps keep those meetings running in more of a structured, I don't want to say controlled fashion, because that's not really what it's about. It's a structured fashion to make sure, as you can see, there's no prejudicial issues going on. We're not trying to hold something against somebody. We're not trying to stop somebody from speaking. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Parliamentary procedures are there to ensure that, well, one, a person's right is protected, where you want to be involved in the process. You want to ensure that the meetings get effectively run. And paramount for me, especially when I run the meetings that I run, is that we are transparent. Everybody, we always do a public comment period. Everybody gets a chance to be heard. They get a chance to present their case, and let the committee, the board, whatever the case may be, the chapter, know what they're thinking. First thing we can do, specifically as a group of chapters of BOAF, is try to stop that free flow of ideas, because it may be something that is going to make the chapters better in the long run. What is the goal of the procedure? Well, it's parliament. So if we go into the law side of it, really it supports assemblies of bodies. So if instead of having chaos and ruling the day, and everybody just kind of jumping in, doing their own thing, shouting from the back row, trying to be heard. It allows them a chance to be recognized. It gives each member a chance to have their opinion brought up. And then and one of the important things is when we're in that assembly, or when we're in that chapter meeting, when we're in that BOAF board meeting, the majority of the membership gets represented by the votes that they take at that time. We're going to go through the voting and how the voting takes place, but it is of all things to try to make sure that everybody's rights are protected and they get heard. So why is it important? Again, we talked about rights about 3 times, but it's also a free discussion. It's about letting people have their opinions. Suppose you're voting on how do we expand membership? Should we open it up to associate members? Should we open it up to professional members? That gives a chance for everybody that's sitting in there in that chapter meeting who wants to be heard, a chance to be heard. Now we're going to talk about how they get heard and how they go through the process of being heard. It's not just, again, not that you're going to stand up in the back of the room and suddenly shout, hey, I've got something to say. It's actually going through the process of being recognized and being able to get a chance to speak to the chair, to the rest of the membership, and have that actually documented and make sure that things are being discussed. Simplest, most direct procedure. I mean, I think there's another group. There's 2 sets of rules that I'm familiar with. One is Robert's Rules of Order, which is probably one of the most used ones that I'm aware of. There's another one called Rothstein's Rules of Order. And the difference between Robert's Rules of Order, which we use at BOAF, and Rothstein's Rules of Order allow the chair to make motions, second motions, and vote. That's kind of unusual in a Robert's Rules of Order. They don't really permit that, but that's something that happens in Rothstein's rules. Only one question can be considered at any one time. We're going to go over that. So we're not overloading the floor. We're not overloading the membership. We're not making it to the point where a member is confused. Am I voting for expanding membership or reducing membership? Am I voting? Hearing only one question at a time allows the membership to keep in their mind what is being heard and what the track is that's being heard. Excuse me, as well as allows them to concentrate on that one at a time. Now, we're going to get into amending motions and things of that nature a little bit later, but specifically, you should only handle one at a time. Precedence governs the order of discussion. So there's a precedence set either in your bylaws or in your agenda or how things go through about how you actually facilitate those discussions. Generally, most discussions go through the chair. So if I want to speak to Ann, I will say, I'll be recognized by the chair and say, Mr. Chair, through the chair to Ann. And that means the chair has the right to tell me, no, that question's out of line, or, not right now. Do you have something else you'd like to talk about? The chair is the one who's going to allow me to, be recognized and then ask that question of another member. Normally, conversations don't happen member to member. It has to go through a controlled process. Members, I just spoke about it. Members need to be recognized before speaking. Every chapter has a president. If the president's not available, it's going to go down to the vice president. Some chapters have multiple vice presidents. You may have a first, a second, or even a third. If neither the president nor the vice president is there, typically you may have a secretary treasurer or an immediate past president available. But at some point, somebody has to be the leader of that meeting. And it's somebody that's supposed to be an executive board member. Now, all remarks are directed through the chair, like I just mentioned, through the chair to Ann, that type of thing. No member, and I also serve on the International Code Council Board of Directors. I'm a director at large. And one thing that we do on that board meeting is we do not ask directly to another board member. All discussions, even if it's a discussion with a staff member at ICC, is through the president to Dominic Sims, through the president to, and just name the staff member. That way we make sure, one, we're recognized, two, we have the permission to speak to the other person. No member is supposed to speak twice to the same question. That gets kind of lax sometimes in some of the local chapters. I've been in some local chapter meetings where There was a semblance of not doing that. It was being talked about multiple times. Now, if there's rebuttal information, they can certainly ask to have rebuttal, have discussion based on a rebuttal. But normally, you speak once to a question until everybody else in that room has had an opportunity to speak. I've actually seen two members in a meeting before kind of bypass the chair in a sense and just go towards each other. At that point, when that happens, the chair needs to step forward and say, we need to bring this back to the chair. The chair will determine when that discussion happens. Not that you're trying to cut off the free exchange of ideas, not that you're trying to show everybody that you're the most important person in the room on that given day. You're trying to prevent chaos and create structure in those meetings where they come in the next meeting or they have the next question that they realize, okay, I need to present this to the chair. It stops issues from growing out of control and allows more order in those meetings. Members do have a right to know what the question is before that assembly. Unlike some things we've heard in the past in other governmental bodies, we want to know what's in it before we actually vote on it. So if we have something about raising dues, the motion should not be, I motion to raise dues and stop. I motion to raise dues $5 for X. I motion to raise dues $10 for X. You kind of need to know, not kind of, you need to know what the question is before the assembly and whether or not you understand what's in that motion. And then you have the ability to know what the affirmative votes were and what the negative votes are. Even in some of the other bodies I serve with, we will sometimes do what's called a roll call vote. And a roll call vote, one, is making sure that as we go through this vote, if it's too close to call, you can't really tell. If you usually do it by raise of hands. It's too close to call, the president will call for a roll call vote. This is when it is imperative to make sure that you only have paid up dues paying members who are current with BOAF and current with your chapter voting. Because if you do not have that situation, you can have things overturned based on the fact that non-members were voting. And it may have, suppose you have a 9-person voting body. You're having one of those off meetings or your meetings are just small. You have 4 people voting one way. You have 5 people voting the other way, but 2 of the 5 are not actual dues paying members and just voted because they're in attendance. Well, then technically the 5 lost because it's only 3 who actually voted out of the 5 who are actually dues paying members. So you can reach out to you can reach out to BOAF. That's a Freudian slip from my old Maryland days. You can reach out to BOAF and actually get a membership list of who is a up-to-date dues paying member. And I would certainly recommend that, especially when you go to elect your chapter officers or people who are serving in leadership positions. Now, how do we determine who's voting and what we look for? First, you need to know if you have a quorum. That quorum is going to be set up in your bylaws. Typically, it's more than half of the active membership. So if you've got 100 people, you're going to need 50 plus 1, or as I put here, a majority is 50% plus 1. We even do that at ICC. We have it set in our bylaws that we have, instead of 50% of the membership, it's the amount of people in the meeting. So if we've got 400 people in a meeting, we're going to need 200 people plus 1. So 201 people showing up to create a quorum so we can actually take care of business. 2/3 majority, which some people call a super majority, is 66% of the people voting on any given issue. We will see this sometimes even in the federal government where they're looking for a 66% vote. You'll see that again. Check it in your bylaws, see if it's specific in your bylaws, whether or not you're required to have that number. Your bylaws may say need 5 voting members present to transact business. It just depends on how your bylaws were written up, approved, and voted on by the membership. Any motion that's made has to be made by, again, a full member. It has to be a dues paying member in order to be able to take action on it. I've actually been in meetings where people who were not members were trying to make motions. a very astute person sitting in the audience realized, wait, this person's not a member. They're actually here. And the person making the motion did not realize that, oops, I didn't realize I couldn't do that. They just thought they got caught up in the process and wanted to be a part of it. Of course, you can always hand that person a membership application and make sure that they join as a member, but there's always a benefit to that as well. But just make sure whoever makes that motion, again, if suppose you're speaking about a building product and somebody makes a motion to send a letter of support, and then you get somebody who's upset by a letter of support, they question you, want to see the minutes from your meeting and find out who made the motion and found out they're not a member, then they can ask for that vote to be overturned. Nomination, it means we're going to propose an individual for office. I've heard people being voluntold, but nomination process is really where it comes from. You can ask for nominations. The president is the one who actually does that. The president will set up a nominating committee. They will go through the process to make sure that is done appropriately. Now, bylaws. The soul of any chapter, any organization, any group. I even have bylaws for the Development Review Committee that I chair here for Marion County. When we look at the bylaws, we look at how we appoint people. It tells us how to run the meetings. It tells us what rules we use to run the meeting by. BOAF has adopted Robert's Rules of Order. I want to say, if I remember right, and Ann can correct me, I think it's the 2006 edition, but I'd have to look at that. But it is enumerated in the bylaws which ones they actually use. The bylaws are the rules by which you govern the management of that organization. I'm currently a member of the Central Florida chapter. So the Central Florida chapter of BOAF is going to have a set group of bylaws or rules separate from BOAF that tells them how they're going to transact business. How am I going to elect my chapter director? What are the officer positions? Who's on the executive board? Who is a director? Who is a director at large? How do I actually set up my agenda in those meetings? And who can be a member? All those things are going to be enumerated in your bylaws. And I've got an example in the next slide of what a set of bylaws look like for actually BOAF itself. You're free as an organization to adopt any rule that you may wish for the bylaws, as long as it doesn't go against anything in the BOAF bylaws that says you have to IAEI, anybody familiar with that group? The local chapter proposes their bylaws, but it actually has to be voted on by the International Office Board. They are not just allowed to set their own. I'm not sure that rule exists at BOAF. It doesn't exist at ICC. So you can set your bylaws to accommodate for what you need to for your area. Obviously, Central Florida is going to be a little different than somewhere out on the panhandle. Different issues with getting people to meetings or whatever the case may be. Above all, the bylaws cannot violate any governmental law. Last thing you want to do is get yourself in trouble with somebody on the federal government side or state or local government side. So make sure you get your bylaws checked for that. Here's an example of the BOAF bylaws. These are the ones that are current. If you go on the BOAF website, you can actually download them and read them. Here's how you go through it. And of course, Article 1 is always the name. Article 2 is going to be the purpose. Article 3 is going to set up the membership and so on and so forth. ICC, you will see the exact same thing. The bylaws just got changed last year at the ABM. It was voted on by the ICC membership, that 50+1% that was in attendance. That's how you actually can legally change the bylaws. You don't get 3 people together sitting in somebody's office and say, okay, I think we need to get rid of the second and third vice president, just do a vice president. You can get in the office, sit there and go through the bylaws and say, I think we need to adjust these issues. But that vote has to go in front of the membership. It has to be a motion. It has to be a vote. You just don't do that on your own and then send it in. Components of bylaws, BOAF. Okay. It's changing on one side, but it's not changing on the other side. Let me see if I can get this thing to change. Here we go. I had a slide that got stuck for a second. Now, an effective meeting. Publish the agenda well before the meeting, give people a chance to actually read it, see what's going to be in that agenda. Some people don't like to do that because they're saying so-and-so looks at the agenda and if doesn't have something he's interested in, he's not going to come. you know, if you're having issues with that, set up a code discussion, something where you talk about code, you know, FPC issues or NEC issues, and that will sometimes generate interest in its own. Always start that meeting on time and always end it on time. And of course, you see the things in between, but the starting and the ending of a meeting, people bank on that. I was on a meeting the other day that went 45 minutes over time. I was chomping at the bit. Luckily, my next meeting wasn't scheduled that tight, but it didn't give me a lot of time in the office to get some things done in between meetings. So start them on time, end them on time. If you got changes to the agenda, we'll take a vote by the body present. So if you show your agenda and say, is there any additions, modifications, or changes to the agenda? Ask for a motion, get a second, and vote on those that typical agenda that you're going to see. Typical agenda is going to have call to order, a roll call, because again, you have to establish a quorum. You establish a quorum by making sure that you have 50% plus 1%, unless you have something else in your bylaws, of the paid voting members present. And I've been in many meetings where it was just simply an informational meeting because there was not enough people to actually transact business. You couldn't even make a motion or get it voted on. So make sure you establish that quorum. Then you're going to go over the minutes of the last meeting. Some chapters go over officer reports. Typically, it's the president's report. At the BOAF, or BOAF will do a CEO report. ICC will do a CEO report. After President Witch's report, you'll see Dominic Sims' report. And they do that for every meeting. And you can, if you're ever at the ABM, you're there a couple days early. That's when we have our meeting. Come in and watch that, because it's ran exactly as we're talking. So what do you do as a chair? So I have to ensure as a chair that I have a quorum to actually run that meeting. If I've got 5 members that I need and I've got 2 people sitting there, I'm missing 3 other members, I can't start anything until I get a quorum. I personally, as a chair, and I've been a chair in 3 states now, 4 states now, actually. As I chair a meeting, I will actually call people. If I think they're not going to, if I'll ask for who's going to be in attendance. Again, I need a head count for food, whatever the case may be, if it's a lunch meeting. And if I see that it looks like we're going to be shaky, I'll start calling some members. Hey, can you make it? We need a few members to get this vote done. Can you make it? I need to actually take action on this bylaw change. Members are required to be recognized, again, by the chair, so they can speak. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos. You're going to have people talking over each other. The chair, it makes the rules on all procedural issues. They should be using the bylaws or any policies and procedures that have been put in place to actually make sure that those meetings run efficiently. The chair may not make a motion nor debate. Now, this is straight out of Robert's rules. You do not make a motion nor debate any of the questions that are up. The chair's job is to make sure everybody's voice gets heard, make sure that no member speaks more than once until everybody else has had a chance to be heard. Certainly it gives somebody a chance to make a rebuttal, and the chair may vote only to break a tie. So if I've got 10 versus 10, the chair then steps in and can break a tie. He's allowed at that point, he or she is allowed at that point to cast a vote. Member obtains, so to make a motion, a member has to obtain the recognition of the chair. This can be kind of fluid sometimes. Here's our treasurer's report. Treasurer goes through the report. Chair should have a chance to say, I need a motion to accept or amend the treasurer's report. A lot of times you'll just have instead of a guy saying, Mr. Chair, and raise his hand or Mrs. Chair and raise their hand and try to get recognized, they'll say, so moved. That's being fluid. I've seen that happen, I think, in every chapter I've ever been in. I don't know that that's really a disqualifier, but technically they're supposed to be recognized by the chair. If that's the worst thing to do, we're doing great. Member states the motion. So the chair just said, hey, I need a motion to approve the treasurer's report or amend the treasurer's report. Motion, the member will be recognized. Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the treasurer's report. Somebody else will second it. Recognition for a second is not necessary. It just has to make sure it's a dues paying member who is active. Need not be in favor of the motion. You can actually make a motion to second just to discuss the motion that's there, so you can make sure you state your cause. And I've done that many times where I made a motion and I will say, I second for discussion only. And that means I want to discuss this motion so we can actually decide if it's something we as a body should actually take into consideration. The chair will then restate it. The motion can be debated at that point. You do not actually debate any motion until you get the second. I've actually seen people try to debate before the second because they wanted to argue with the person who made the motion. That's not the way it works. To be very controlled, if we don't get a second, it dies and there's no reason to discuss it. I've actually had motions died for the lack of a second. Once that motion is completely debated, and then we take a vote on the process or on the motion that came up to approve the treasurer's report. And at that point, the chair will announce the result of the vote. Now, for small committees, you can say the vote was 5-0 in favor of, or 5-0 in opposition, or 4-1, whatever the case may be. For larger groups, you wouldn't normally, you would just say that motion passes and you move on to the next one. It's only when it's going to be a debated vote where you do the roll call vote so you can actually document who voted which way. Or if you've ever been to the ICC ABM, we actually have little voting devices. We push the button, it's automatic. It pops up on the screen, gives you the exact number and the percentage. So nominations time is another responsibility of the president or the chair. The chair can set up a nominations committee, or they can just proclaim nominations are open and ask for nominations from the floor. Now, a member acquires recognition from the chair, and then he nominates somebody for office. Mr. Chair, I'd like to be recognized. I nominate Terry Sullivan for the office of chair. That would be a process you would go through to actually get recognized and then make your motion. The chair would then actually state, is there any further nominations? It doesn't require a second in a lot of cases. This needs to know if there's any further nominations. The standard for that in Robert's rules is you do it 3 times. If there's no other people running, then you can do that by unanimous consent. The secretary, as we used to say back in the old days, and I'm an old guy, secretary can cast a single vote because he's stating that nominations, it was unanimous consent, nominations were closed on that. Terry Sullivan is now president. Membership votes on a nomination. If there's nobody else running, if there's somebody else running, then the membership votes. They go through the process to get that vote. When I won election to the ICC board of directors, there was, I was very curious if somebody was going to run against me because I didn't fare so well the first time I ran. I actually came out of the nominating committee and got defeated on the floor. That happens. You learn from it, you move forward. I learned from it, I moved forward. The second time around, I had 2 other people that were running for the same office I was. I came out nominating again. This time I had nobody running against me, so I was proclaimed unanimous consent and became an ICC board member. Hardest election I think I've ever been through. Results of the vote, only paid members, again, may vote. Don't forget to get the membership list from BOAF if you really don't know who a paid member is. You may have had somebody showing up who saw the notice laying around the office and has been showing up for a year and was never a paid member. Make sure that person is a paid member before they're allowed to do any transaction of the business for the association. Always make sure you get a majority vote. Check your bylaws. Do I need simply 50% plus 1, or do I need 2/3? Some bylaws will say a special resolution is going to need a 3/4 majority. Just depends on what business you're transacting as to which votes you actually need to get. So for the basic principles that we just discussed, to get the quorum, I need to be able to act on any chapter business. It's either defined in the bylaws. Some require 2/3 membership. Some require 50% plus 1. One question considered at any given time. No member is supposed to speak until they're actually recognized. And the chair should maintain strict impartiality during discussion. They can vote if it will, they can vote if it will affect the outcome. In other words, that 50-50 tiebreaker. But the biggest thing, if you're a chair of a group, you don't go in preset notion. You want to make sure you're being impartial. Otherwise, it looks like you're leading a discussion and you're against whoever it is that's coming up. The transparency side of this is I need to go in, whether I'm for it or against it, doesn't matter. I'm the chair, I'm running the meeting. I need to let them see that I'm impartial. Quorum is the minimum number. We talked about that. The chair should ensure that there is a quorum. We talked about that. The quorum should be determined by the bylaw, so it depends on how many people you need. It ceases to exist if it ceases to exist during the meeting. Only the motions in order, in other words, the ones that you can actually act on, are to recess until a quorum returns or a motion to adjourn. You can take no other action. You can't do anything beyond that because you have no quorum. You have nobody that you can actually act with. It stops all debate. It stops all discussion. It stops everything. And that's actually happened. That actually happened to me running a DRC. Two of the members had to step out and take a phone call, and I lost my quorum. So that's definitely something that you need to look for. Chair, make sure the chair is the one who calls the meeting to order. Unless the chair is not there, your bylaws will dictate who takes over when the chair is not present. Calls for motions, such as to approve the minutes or approve the treasurer's report or approve the agenda. And the chair will also adjourn the meeting with a motion normally. If it's virtual, you'll hear a lot of chairs saying, I need a motion to adjourn. And typically people will raise their hand in a virtual meeting. Sometimes that's a little more of a structured meeting than an in-person. You'll see somebody raise their hand, they'll be recognized, they'll make a motion to adjourn. You'll hear somebody say second. There's always not a raised hand for that. And typically you'll hear a chair say, all those opposed, because it's easier to count the opposed hands than the people who want to leave. I've done that every time I've ever ran a virtual meeting. Again, when I want to make a motion, okay, now I'm going to nominate Terry for that position as president. I need to obtain the floor from the president. The president's the only one, or whoever's running the meeting, president, vice president, whatever the case may be. I need to obtain the floor from that person. I make a motion. I need a second, unless it's a nominating thing where is there any other nominations from the floor? I require a second for that motion. So I make a motion to change the bylaws to read that we allow contractor members as part of an associate member class, if you don't have it already. I need to get a second for that. The chair is then going to restate what I just said. The chair is going to make sure there's discussion on that vote, and it's going to call the question by the membership. Now, what calling the question by the membership means is I've just made these motions. I've gone through it. I'm looking to see, is there a way that I can actually, people feel like you've already beat it around enough, or you don't need to take any other action. Then I can look at, I'm going to pick a name offline, Timothy Miller. Timothy Miller says, call the question. Don't even have to really be recognized for calling a question. That means there's been enough debate. There's nothing new that's come out. We're going to call the question so we can put this question to bed. That's a proper call or question, and allows for that motion, that debate to stop. At that point, the chair stops all discussion and he calls for a vote on the motion. Typically, that's only used when either there's no new information coming out, there's nothing else that needs to be said. I've heard call to questions on not only ICC board meetings, but I've also heard call to questions at NFPA committee meetings. So that gets actually used pretty often. So member rises, addresses the chair. Chair recognizes, member says, I move that. Chair calls for a second. Do I get my second? If I get my second, we get to move into the next part where the chair is going to restate it. We're going to have that discussion and we're going to go through that process. Voting, here's the important part. You heard me beat this to death because we've had it happen a lot. And it's actually overturned some votes that were important votes because people voting were not actually paid members. So the chair also, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Those opposed say no. However you want to say it, but that's the typical way of doing it. If a motion requires 2/3, you can ask for rising or showing of the hands. In other words, raise your hand if you're in support. Raise your hand if you're in opposition. Always ask for those opposed. A lot of times people won't ask for those who are abstained. If you haven't asked for somebody that abstain, and I've done that before when it looked like I had all the members voting. I literally had one member who didn't vote. He said, Mr. Chair, I'd like to note my vote as an abstention. They had a conflict with that particular item and they wanted it on the record that they actually abstained from that vote. That is another one that you can ask for, but you don't always get a lot of abstentions in some of the meetings. When we go through the discussion, chair begins the debate by asking for a discussion. We have a motion, we have a second. What I would usually do is say, we have a motion, we have a second. I have a motion by Ann, we have a second by Terry. Is there any discussion on this motion? You can set up your own. I don't know that Robert's rules explains exactly how to say that, but that's how I say it. The maker of the motion actually has the right to speak first. If they are properly recognized. Properly recognized means chair recognized them. Speaker of the motion can say, yes, I'm adamantly against installing contractor members as part of the associate class. I think those contractor members should be part of a professional class where we bring them in because they're duly licensed through the construction industries licensing bureau, whatever the case may be. And I think they need to be a professional class versus an associate class where we put students and retired members. Okay, he just made his discussion. The chair will look for other discussion. This is the point in the process where literally you sell what you're trying to get the membership to vote on. I really want to get this motion out. I really feel passionate about this. I want the membership to see how passionate I am. I really need to explain this motion in detail. I can only speak once unless everybody else has been heard. Any motion that stops or limits debate requires a 2/3 vote. So if I make a motion that, hey, we need to stop this debate, I'm going to require 2/3 to actually get that to transact. Now, we're going to go into a vote, but we get into the middle of a tie vote. The tie vote is a failed vote. That motion stops. It goes nowhere. A revote can actually be taken. The chair can actually ask if there's any. The chair can, if he wants, and this is a little bit of the fluidness of the chair or the ability that he has to say, okay, do we want to have additional debate on this? If not, the chair can allow the discussion. If not, the chair can either break a tie or put it out there. I've known some chairs that were not going to break a tie. They wanted the membership to decide. I've seen other chairs that in chapter meetings I've been involved in had no problem breaking a tie because they had a vested interest. They had an interest in seeing this thing through. They've either been working on it, maybe it's come up in a couple of other meetings, and they wanted to put this issue to bed. So it's up to the chair really if he wants to vote or not vote. But in doing so, he needs to be definitely transparent. So points of order, we have certain points that we go by. Two that we felt that the committee felt was specifically important for everybody to understand is point of order. Point of order means something's improper, is improper procedure, somebody breached a practice. Point of order. Mike Savage is not a member of Palm Coast chapter. He should not be voting on anything that has anything to do with that chapter. That would be a point of order because I am not a member of that chapter. But point of information is a member may need to bring up some additional points of information that may have not been discussed so that people in the room, so other members, paid voting members in the room can actually say, okay, now I feel like I'm making an informed vote. I've been in some NFPA processes where certain things were not mentioned by the person making a motion, either because they forgot or the implication is they didn't want it to come out and somebody else brought up a point of additional information and it did change some of the votes. So when we go through motions, we got a couple of things. You need a main motion. You can take action on nothing until you get a main motion. So Mike Savage made a motion about changing the location of the meetings, the day and the time. Brings that motion in front. I get recognized. I bring that in front of the body. In order only when no other motion is pending. So I remember I can only deal with one motion. I can only deal with one item in front of the body at a time. So if nobody else has anything up, there's no other motions, I make a motion that we change our meetings from 7:30 Wednesday morning. I don't know what time you meet, but some chapters meet lunch, some meet in the morning. I want to change I want to put a motion that we change our meeting time from 7:30 a.m. Wednesday morning to 9 a.m. Thursday morning. Only one main motion can be on the floor at that time. It does require a second, like any other motion, because the main motion is your main motion. Usually approved by the majority vote unless your bylaws call for super majorities, either 66% or 2/3 or a 3/4 vote. That is a main motion. Now, for the next slide, probably not the best motion to make because there can be a amending motion. Amending motion can be made to that main motion. So what happens when I do apply amending motion to a main motion? The amending motion is secondary, but it's being applied to the primary, it's being applied to the main motion. So the main motion becomes secondary at that point, and I now have to deal with that amending motion, which is the primary one. We can have an indefinite number of those as long as I keep looking at this is a motion to a motion to a motion, or amendment to an amendment, or you will hear some people say, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a friendly amendment to that motion. That's the same thing as doing a secondary amending motion. I'd like to make a friendly amendment to that motion. Friendly amendment goes back to the motion maker. The motion maker either approves or disapproves of the friendly amendment. If they approve of the friendly amendment, you'll always ask the seconder, is the seconder in agreement? Seconder says yes, suddenly that becomes the new motion. Amending motion actually takes care of you voted on something, but we have a main motion, but we want to change it, and we want to change it formally. Now I get a second on the amendment, and we go through new discussion on the amending motion, and then I take a vote on the amending motion. Then I go back to the main motion as amended. So it keeps everything else in that main motion, but I'm doing it as amended. So there's kind of two ways to do it. The friendly amendment is usually a quicker, easier way to get it done. Not everybody has that in their bylaws, though. Most people will have the amendment as we see here in their bylaws versus a friendly amendment. Now, call to question. I said earlier, it's not always debatable. Most from the BOAF and from other bylaws I pulled, it does require a supermajority, a 2/3 vote in order for that calling the question to pass. It passes, and if it passes, if I make I need to call the question, must be recognized by the chair to make that motion. That motion passes, all debate stops. The vote is taken immediately on whatever the standing motion is that's in play at the time. I cannot take a vote on any other motion. It actually has to be the one that actually is in effect at the time we were debating. If it doesn't receive a 2/3 vote, all debate keeps going. That call to question vote stops. All debate that I'm actually dealing with continues to go forward, and we keep debating that until I've actually witnessed in a couple of meetings a call to question fail first time, fail a second time, and pass the third time, because at that point nobody felt like there was any additional information, but the two bodies who were really discussing the motion, one for, one against, were really just going back and forth over it. Table motion. This happens sometime. The technical term will be lay on table. You'll actually hear the way we do it, even on my committee that I run here for the county, is a motion to table. Should not be used to postpone indefinitely. You should have a drop dead date, bring it back before the body at the next meeting, bring it back to this body in 30 days, bring it back to this body in the committee I run, and we actually meet once a week, every Monday. So we usually put a date, bring it back to this body in 15 days. Well, we only meet every 14 days or every 7 days. So at the 14th day, they have to bring it back in front of us. Detention sometimes referred to as sometimes is a refer or commit, which sends the committee for further review. It's giving people time, a chance to actually work out some issues. If it looks like a motion is going to fail, somebody will actually say, motion to table that motion to table that item. That motion gives to people who are working on that issue the additional time needed to either one, solidify their support or actually make sure that they've got everything put together so it is a good, valid motion. Maybe information came up during the debate and they actually need additional time to actually make that happen. So I can't get anything to work. I've been tabled. When I get ready to pull that motion from the table, I need a motion to reconsider. I've got the motion to reconsider. The reconsider voted. It went through. It looks like it's going nowhere. Everything's getting ready to go south. I'm going to lose every motion I've got. If I ever want to, I may make a motion to withdraw, because suppose I don't withdraw, it fails, and then I come back in a year and say, did we not hear this motion already? And didn't it fail once? It's kind of like making sure that you can go in and say, okay, I withdrew the motion because I made a motion to withdraw, so I can actually take into account everything that was being said, not only in the first meeting, but the second meeting. So the motion can be made at any time prior to voting. And that's the key. It has to be done prior to the membership actually voting on an issue or a motion. Before restated by the chair belongs to the motion maker. So I can withdraw my own motion if I'm the motion maker before the chair actually restated, before the vote actually happens. Changed or modified in any way with approval of the maker or the seconder. That's that friendly amendment we were talking about. After the chair has restated that motion, though, it belongs to the assembly. The maker would then have to ask permission to withdraw from the assembly. Chair treats it first in unanimous consent request, and if objection, treated as a subsidiary motion. So as a secondary motion, really, it's not a primary motion at that point. So if I want to make a motion to withdraw and the chair has not restated it, I withdraw my motion. And chair will normally ask the seconder, are you okay with that? And the seconder will say yes or no. If the chair has already restated that motion, now that motion belongs to the whole assembly, not just to the maker. It's the maker's motion, but now it belongs to everybody. So then it needs to go through the formalized process to actually get that motion to be withdrawn. Now we've done everything. Everybody's tired. Everybody wants to go home, and we're looking for a motion to adjourn. You just don't stand up and walk out. You don't walk into just like you don't walk in, just like a president should not walk into a meeting. And suppose I have a guest speaker coming in and I say, you know what, meeting's yours, go ahead and run it. Guest speaker doesn't run the meeting. The president does, the chair does. Same, so he starts on time, he finishes on time, as we recall. As I'm adjourning a meeting, I am required to get a motion as a chair, and I even do it on our county meetings. You'll see a lot of times your board of county commissioners, your city council, somebody like that will also do this. Motion to adjourn. It requires a second. I'm going to ask as a chair, is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Chair, I make a motion. Can be as simple as that. Is there a second? I second it. Not debatable. That motion is either going to pass or fail. Majority rules. If I got 3 that want to adjourn, but 2 who want to stay and debate something else, the 3 win. Meeting's over. If the 2 want to stay and debate, it's no longer an actionable issue. It is literally there for them to talk it out. The 3 who voted can get up and walk out, and you lose your quorum. A chair can, and sometimes adjourn a meeting without a motion. You need to check your bylaws to make sure no other business is pending. If the time is reached on the adopted agenda, in other words, he said, okay, we've reached our number, we're going to adjourn. We will come back at our next meeting and handle this issue. Or really, remember in the very beginning, in the front part of the slides, if I lose my quorum, that meeting is adjourned because I lost a quorum. So there's 3 different ways that the chair can actually adjourn a meeting. Now we talked about this a little bit, and here's some meeting minutes from the Code Development Committee that Arlene Stewart was kind enough to provide to me, just for an example. So on the minutes, we're going to record what was done, but it's not going to be a verbatim transcript. It's not. You should not be putting in there every little single thing that was done. It should be not verbatim. It should just simply state motion made to approve X. Motion made by Mike Savage to approve X, seconded by Terry Sullivan, motion passed 10-2. It doesn't have to go into, well, Charlie said this and Bob said that. It doesn't need to be verbatim. Motion needed to approve the minutes from the previous meeting. Those meeting minutes do not become official legal minutes until there's actually a motion to approve and there is a second that has been received. Any corrections at that time need to be taken care of. So usually when I call for a motion to approve the minutes, the way I do it is I need a motion to either approve, amend, or modify the minutes based off the previous meeting. So I've just called for 3 actions. We're either going to approve it, we're going to modify it, we're going to amend it. Modify and amend, it can be the thing. It can be amend. I was not here for that meeting. The minutes are wrong. Somebody checked the wrong box. It wasn't me. Or my name is spelled wrong. I would like to have my name corrected in the minutes. Requires a second. After I've called for that, it requires a second. If I get my second, we can correct anything, and it does require a vote. I need to go through, get a vote to approve it. Once that vote is approved, they now become official minutes, because until that point, they're only draft minutes. Then they become official minutes. And if I have a lawyer who wants to see, okay, and I'm going to use this one. I see ICC GR rep Mazzarella Dottie Mazzarella was at the meeting, and she's talking about them working on a checklist and an app to support Senate Bill 4D for consistency. I'm opposed to 4D. I would like to see what they're working on. He can ask to see when he sees those minutes, he can actually ask to interview Dottie. Now, obviously, she's a GR rep for ICC. It's somebody outside your chapter. That's just one example of how those minutes can be used. So you need to be, again, detailed enough where you're capturing who is there, but not verbatim, so you're actually capturing every single thing that person said. Looking at these minutes that was provided by Arlene, I can look at it and say, okay, Scott McAdam was there. He was a chair. If Scott McAdam was there at 2 p.m. on August 24th and he was chairing the meeting, there's no possible way he was somewhere else doing something else at that exact same time. Those are other things minutes can do. It also validates for your employer that you were actually attending at a meeting. Typical agenda would include is under Robert's Rules of Order. One of the duties of the president is to actually create that agenda. Some chapters tend to do it differently. They assign it to a secretary and tell the secretary, you get the meeting minutes, or you get the meeting agenda together. I will tell you what I want to be on it. That doesn't mean the president has to specifically himself have a Word document, create the meeting agenda, and do everything himself. It just means he's going to provide guidance to the secretary to actually get the meeting agenda put together so the group can take action on it. The group has the final say what's actually in that agenda. I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the meeting agenda or any additions or deletions. At that point, the membership can say, you know what, we don't think we want to actually deal with, suppose I've got something under unfinished business. We don't want to deal with that now. We'd like to have that pulled from the agenda and brought back to the body at a later date. Remember, we're not going to table it indefinitely, but that is the time when we can actually pull that. Whether creating Robert's Rules of Order for a special meeting agenda or an electronic meeting, make sure that there's enough time to create the proper agenda. It can be used to actually get people to your meeting versus to keep them away from your meeting. And with that was the end of the presentation. I tried to go fast, so we had time for questions at the end. But if anybody has any questions, now is a perfect time to go through that. And I will stop sharing really quick, and I'm gonna.
Yeah. So unmute yourself if you have any questions. And thank you, Mike, for putting that PowerPoint together. Will you send me the most current copy of your PowerPoint so I can share it with the chapter leaders?
Absolutely, and I apologize for not doing that sooner.
And I think I hit the record button on this meeting, so give me just a couple of days to get it up on the internet, and we'll share that also. So if you don't have the ability to unmute yourself, tell me in the chat. But I was hoping that today, would be an opportunity for us to just start having a discussion among the chapter leaders and chapter officers as to, some of the challenges of putting together, the challenges of running a local chapter, and, what resources that we can provide from headquarters, but also to sort of provide a networking opportunity so that you can meet other chapter leaders and not reinvent the wheel where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's see. I'm not seeing any questions, and I'm not hearing anyone who's unmuted. Let me reclaim host. I think you can raise your hand or put it in the chat if you want to ask a question and you're not able to. I just want to make sure I haven't silenced everyone permanently on this call. So.
And
Hi.
hi, it's Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, it was mentioned that we could get the paying members through BOAF. Would that be through you?
Celeste.
For the chapters?
Celeste, yeah, all you have to do is send Celeste Croman, CROMAN at BOAF.net an email. Just ask for a current list of your membership. And we've been processing memberships and renewals. And we'll also, while we were doing this, while we were having the meeting, I sent Celeste an email. I said, we need to talk to the chapters about their expired members, their list of members that have not renewed yet. So we'll get both out to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And then please guard your chapter member information, their contact information. Definitely reach out to them, especially if you haven't seen them or heard from them in a while. If you get any contact information changes, like, oh, I don't work there anymore, or I've moved on, let us know so we can update their membership. But just please protect your lists from salespeople that would love to get everybody's phone number and email address.
I just sent you a PDF of the presentation.
Right.
I find that easier to send it to because it doesn't take as much space.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Are there any other questions? I don't want to keep you all, but there is I know it's about 5 o'clock and y'all have probably put in a long day. The survey, when we close the meeting out, does ask you for feedback, how often you would like to meet like this. And, if you want to get together at conference, and what topics you would like to see in the future. So any information you can share with me, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I'll take it. And, I'll just thank you all for joining us today. This was our first member services chapter leaders training. And so I hope this is just the first of many yet to come, so that we can help equip you to facilitate and grow your chapters. So since I'm not hearing or seeing anything, I'm going to close out the meeting and tell you all to have a wonderful Thursday afternoon and Friday and the weekend. It's almost here.